Okay, so I think we'll kick off there. It's 3 minutes past one. I'm sure other people will pop in and out. So just a little bit of housekeeping. If you guys could put yourself on mute just so that there's no distractions. I am recording this to put on our YouTube channel as well. So a lot of people actually go back if they can't make the lecture and go and have a look on YouTube. We've got other lectures there as well, if you'd like to go and check those out. So just firstly, just a bit about me. My name's Kristina Wilson. I own a company called Inverted Atlas, and we do special interest tours overseas. So we're based in Australia, and we have a tour to Egypt coming up in September, which I will be leading as the specialist tour leader. What qualifies me to do this is I have a master's degree from Macquarie University here in Sydney, and I specialize in Egyptology. So we'll kick off our free lecture here. So today we're going to discuss traditional travel to Egypt, an overview of some of Egypt's lesser known sites, which I'm sure is why you're here, and why are these sites so special and why should you visit them? So Egypt is more than meets the eye. It's more than the pyramids and it's more than the Valley of the Kings. So Egypt has over 100 pyramids, and the Giza pyramids aren't even the oldest. Khufu, who built the Great Pyramid, is actually not the greatest pyramid builder. His father is, who actually built two pyramids. He doesn't get enough credit, but we'll get into him later. Traditional touring, or as I'd like to call it, the standard tour program. Um, Most tours to Egypt are exactly the same, which is why Egypt has all these sort of lesser known sites that are basically empty. Um, Most tours to Egypt include the Giza pyramids, the Step Pyramid, the Cairo Museum, an old cruise with over 100 people, Karnak and Luxor's temples, three standardized tombs in the Valley of the Kings, Hatshepsut's temple, Edfu, Komombo, and Philae, and then an optional trip to Abu Simbel. It's very, very difficult to find anything that sort of goes outside the box. And it is, from a tour operator standpoint, very difficult to put together anything that's outside the box because operators in Egypt don't seem to understand why you would want to visit anything other than these sites, which is a bit strange. Um, Many of Egypt's best sites are located right next door to sites that are commonly added to these tour itineraries, yet have almost zero visitors, which means you often have them all to yourself. I mean, can you imagine walking through an epic Egyptian temple and being the only one there? That's what you get to do with us. And even if you don't go with us and you go on your own, you visit these temples, you could be the only one in there. Whereas, another temple that is on one of these itineraries, like Hatshepsut's temple, you're literally sharing it with 1,000, 2,000 peak season, 3 or 4,000 people a day. And that's not how most people picture their trip to Egypt. Okay, so we will start off with the pyramids, but we're not going to start off with the Giza pyramids. We're going to start off with older pyramids. So the pyramids in Egypt are spread all across the country, but its older ones are around Cairo. They're sort of clustered around that area. Um, and these pyramids are actually older than the Giza pyramids, and they basically are abandoned in the deserts around the sites of Maidum and Dashur. Dashur especially can be really frustrating when you're on a standard tour. It's home to the Red Pyramid and the Bent Pyramid, which are they're some of my favorite sites in Egypt. And as you visit the Step Pyramid of Saqqara, you watch them drive right by them, which is really, really frustrating for a lot of people. Um, Many people they have this idea that when they visit Giza, I mean, I did. This was you have this idea when you visit Egypt, you're going to visit the Giza pyramids, you're going to stand in front of them, you're going to be alone in the desert, tumbleweeds blowing past and camels around you and silence, getting lost in the scope of history. It's not like that at all. You go there and there's people hassling you. They're right on top of Cairo. There are camels everywhere, people pestering you to ride them. There's not the experience that you do get there. But if you do go out to the site of Dashur, especially the Red Pyramid, you stand there in front of it, and that is the exact experience that you get, which is amazing. Um, So we'll kick off with the Mydoom pyramid. So this is the oldest of the pyramids that we're going to discuss. So this one, in chronological order, comes after the Step Pyramid, which was Egypt's first pyramid, which is built by Djoser. Um, this pyramid did start out as a step pyramid, but they decided to change it to a true pyramid partway through construction. Most of the limestone casing has slid down and turned into rubble. So that's what you see that's sort of surrounding this tower-like structure around the bottom there. Any larger pieces were sort of carried off to build mastaba tombs that are in the area. So mastaba tombs were what the Egyptians originally were buried in. So the Egyptian pharaohs were originally built in them. Mastaba in Arabic means bench, and it's kind of like a small, low construction. And that was actually how they built the step pyramid. First, they built Djoser and Mastaba, and then they extended it and extended it, and then they decided to put another Mastaba on top, and then another and another and another, and they ended up with this pyramid structure. So that's how it evolved. But later on, in Egyptian history, Mastabas were still being built, but they filtered down to be used for queens, and nobles and other elites who could afford them. And another great site to visit, which I'm not going to talk about in this presentation, is the Mastaba of Meroruka, which is actually at Saqqara, right next to the Step Pyramid, and he's an Old Kingdom official, and his Mastaba is one of the best examples of Old Kingdom Egyptian art that you can see. And it's especially cool because inside the pyramids, like, the Giza pyramids, this pyramid, the Mydoom pyramid, the Bed pyramid, there's no pictures, there's nothing. And inside this mastaba, there's statuary, there's false doors, there's reliefs, all the paints vibrant. So it is something that is really worth going into. So if you're ever there, ask your guide about it. And again, it's obviously on our tour. I wouldn't miss that one. So the Mydoom Pyramid is located about 60 kilometers south of Cairo, in an area known as the Fayum. So the Fayum is an oasis. This pyramid has platforms inside, so the inner steps and the horizontal casing slid down off these steps because you can see here they're just too steep. It's got one shaft. So it's just got this single shaft that goes down to the burial chamber, and then there's another little chamber off there, which is incomplete. So we're going to talk a little bit about the Fayum itself because it's also a really interesting area that nobody visits. So it's the Mydoom period is close by this area. And it's one of the oldest inhabited places in Egypt. So people were living here in very early times, and it's been continuously inhabited. So it was sort of refounded as a Greek city and called Crocodiliopolis. And it became one of the bread baskets of the Roman Empire. So it was somewhere where the Romans imported grain from. That's what it means by breadbasket of the Roman Empire. It's a really beautiful place. So its primary town, so there's a couple of little villages around the oasis. Its primary town is Tunis, which is actually on a list of the most beautiful villages on Earth. And this is a place that's been made famous also by its local arts and crafts, especially its pottery. The most famous thing around this area is actually Wadi El Hitan, which is colloquially known as the Valley of the Whales. So this place was once underwater, and it was home to a fossil, a kind of prehistoric proto whale. And it provides paleontologists with the missing link into the evolution of whales, which is really cool. Basically, the way whales evolved is completely different to the way other mammals evolved. So we're used to this idea that, mammals walked out of the ocean. So, that the fish grew legs and walked out of the ocean. With whales, it's actually the other way around. So the discovery here is that whales were originally a land-based creature, and then they went back into the sea, which is a really strange phenomenon as far as evolution goes. This is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. There's no other place on Earth which yields this amount of proto-whale fossils in such an easily accessible environment. I say easily accessible, you have to take a four-wheel drive out here. So, while it's not on a lot of standard tours, not a lot of people know about it, but it is very easy to get a four-wheel drive tour to go out to this place. And of course, it is very, very worth it because it is very, very strange seeing whale bones in the desert. And the state of preservation of these bones is the best in the world. So they're preserved in such a way and they're preserved so well that they've actually found the contents of the creature's stomach so they can tell what the whales ate. And also in this area too, we get a complete overview of the ecology of the area because they've also found fossils of sharks, turtles, and crocodiles. So we've got a complete fossilized ecosystem, an aqua ecosystem right in the middle of the desert. So something really amazing to visit. The Burnt Pyramid. So this is another one. This one comes directly after the Doom Pyramid, and this one is my favorite. I love this pyramid. And this one can be difficult to visit. So if you're on your own, I tried to visit it like the first couple of times I went to Egypt, and the taxi driver I was with told me it's in a military zone. I can't drive up to it. That's just the Egyptian way of saying I'm too lazy to go and see it. I found that out. My third trip, I did manage to get out there. I went back out to the Red Pyramid, which is the next one I'll talk about. And then the driver just drove me out there. And I said, isn't this in a military zone? He said, no, that's just something lazy taxi drivers tell tourists. And I was like, right, I could have visited that before. So it's odd in the fact that it is obviously bent. It's the first sort of successful true pyramid, even though it is, it has that bent shape. So I think they decided that the incline was too sharp and the foundation was also unstable, so it wasn't going to work. So they decided to change their sort of plan halfway up. This is located at the site of Dashur. So this is one of the ones where if you're on the standard tour and you're on your way back from Saqqara, you can wave at as the tour bus goes past. The same with the Red Pyramid. And it's obviously one of the most interesting pyramids that you can visit. I love it because it's a mistake. You don't often see the ancient Egyptians make mistakes. And I love that. I think it gives them a real sort of humanizing quality. And it's also something I like to point to with the conspiracy theorists when they say, aliens built the pyramids. And it's like, well, actually, no. This was built before the Great Pyramid. I don't think they flew, 90 billion light years to come down and leave a mistake behind. I don't think it works that way. So it really shows the evolution of pyramid building. Which is really great and really important for our understanding of architecture in ancient Egypt. In recent times, they've opened it to tourism, which is fantastic. So in 2019, so we can go inside this pyramid. The first time I went to Dashur, you couldn't go inside it anyway, so I wasn't that annoyed at the driver lying to me that it was in a military zone, but you can definitely go inside it now. There's actually two pyramids on the site. So there's the Bent Pyramid, of course, and then there's the satellite pyramid. So satellite pyramids were sometimes used for the king's cult, or they were used for maybe the king's queen, or if a high-ranking official, maybe if the official did a really good job. So this pyramid was originally meant for the king's mother. So Sneferu built this pyramid, and it was meant for his mother, Queen Hetepheres, who was the mother of Khufu. Khufu was the builder of the Great Pyramid. Hetepheres was likely never buried in this pyramid. She was likely buried in it. Well, we're actually not sure where she was buried because we did find her actual tomb at Giza next to the Great Pyramid. So she's buried in a pit tomb. We're not even sure it's a pit tomb because there may have been a superstructure. So there may have been a mastaba over the top. There may have been a temple. There may have been something there to mark it, but time has just taken that away from us. So it's a shaft tomb or a pit tomb. And it was undisturbed. So the tomb of Tutankhamun is not the only royal tomb that's undisturbed. This one was undisturbed. So in this tomb, we found golden furniture, we found jewelry, we found burial equipment, but we found no mummy. So that's really odd. So either this was some kind of cenotaph for the Queen's mortuary cult, so the worship of the Queen in the afterlife, which wasn't overly popular in the Old Kingdom, um, or there's a plot that's been proposed that the Queen was buried in this satellite pyramid or buried elsewhere, and then the mummy and her funerary stuff was sort of stolen, and the officials didn't want to tell the king that his mother's body had been stolen. So they said, "Oh yeah, we're going to bury her just, in this, mastaba tomb or pit tomb next to your pyramid." And then he never inspected it and they kind of just got away with it. So, but it is undisturbed. It is an undisturbed royal burial minus the mummy. You can see all of Hetefhera's burial equipment, or grave goods as we call them in archaeology, on display in the Cairo Museum. And it's one of the best exhibits in there. It's really the only intact burial from the Old Kingdom, which is, really amazing. So we're talking about 2,000 years before the time of Tutankhamun. So it's a really significant find. The Red Pyramid. So Sneferu wasn't buried in the Bent Pyramid, obviously because it's not perfect. No pharaoh wants to be buried in an imperfect tomb. So he finished the Bent Pyramid, and somebody else was probably buried there, either an official or a family member, or, somebody is here, you can have this, it's a mistake, so have your own pyramid. So Sneferu was most likely buried in the Red Pyramid, which is Egypt's first true pyramid. And most people, when I show them a picture, like, oh yeah, that's the Great Pyramid. No, it's not. It's the Red Pyramid. It has a much, it has a, not the incline is not as steep. So it's a bit different. All the limestone casing is gone, just like the Great Pyramid, but it sits deserted at Dashur. You can walk right up to it. You can go inside it. It was a monument for Sneferu to be proud of. It was the first successful true pyramid. So the interior of this one, it's different again. So all pyramids are different inside. There's no pyramids that are the same. So if you ever go to Egypt and a guide tells you they're all the same inside, don't listen. It's more on that later. So this is really fun pyramid to go into. So this shaft here is about 1 meter high, and you get to scramble down it. And there's two sort of antechambers here. You scramble through here. And then there's some rickety old stairs, and you go up into the burial chamber, and there's never anybody there. So you feel just like Indiana Jones, and you don't get that experience at the Giza pyramids, and that's for sure. So this is what it's like inside. So this is me. This is the very first time. Actually, I think it's the third time. No, it's the third time. The third time I went in this pyramid. So you can see the light there. That's sort of about halfway up the pyramid. So there's like a pathway that they've carved into it. So you can go halfway up, and then you have to sort of shimmy down. You definitely can't stand up. And this staircase, you saw the two antechambers. After the two antechambers, there's this rickety old staircase, and at the top of that, there's another little tunnel, and you kind of have to, squeeze through that to get into the burial chamber, which is unfortunately empty. We don't know what happened to Sneferu and his mummy. Okay, so this is Giza. We'll tell you a little bit about Giza. One site that doesn't get visited very often, as ludicrous as this sounds, is the Great Pyramid. People stand in front of it and take pictures, but people don't bother to go inside. That's for two reasons. The first reason, which isn't so much of a reason anymore, is the ticket office is so bloody hard to find. They only let 100 people in per day. And there's a good reason for that. So they, about 20 years ago, they were letting a lot of people in. But the problem is, because Egypt's so dry, people were going in there with their, bottled water, and people's breath, the condensation from people's breath was actually causing mold to form in the Grand Gallery, which leads to Khufu's burial chamber. So they limited their visitor numbers to 100 people per day. So it's 50 in the AM and 50 in the PM. So the tickets can be quite hard to come by. On our tour, this is a standard inclusion. So we want you to go in there. We want you to see, the interior of this pyramid because not many people do. What's included on the standard tour is the picture next door, which is Khufu's pyramid. So that's the second pyramid at Giza, which is still cool. But this is a picture that you won't get. Basically, what it looks like is hundreds of people moving in both directions down a shaft that's roughly 1 meter high by 1.5 meters wide. It's horrific. And if you're at all claustrophobic, like my poor mother, you definitely should not attempt this. If you want to try, one that's a bit more closed off, the Red Pyramid is great because at least you're not in there with, 100 other people. And the very first time I went to Giza, we were on a standard tour. I just got my bachelor's, and the guide said, "Oh yeah, the pyramids are all the same inside," and I was like, nudging my mother, saying, "No, they're not." But my mother, this was the cheap option. That's my mother for you. And then she panicked going down in there and was even more panicked when we were down in the burial chamber and basically had to queue to get out. That's really not an experience you want, especially if you're claustrophobic. Okay, so we're going to leave pyramids behind us now. There's many, 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 many more dotted all over Egypt, but I've only got sort of an hour, so I can't go through them all. I did do another lecture last year called The Evolution of the Pyramids, which focuses exclusively on pyramids and pyramid building. So if you're interested to hear that one, look us up on YouTube, and the recording of that lecture is there. So we're going to move on to something which is obviously very enigmatic, Egypt's lost cities. Now, most people are not aware that Egypt even has lost cities. These are something that never feature on itineraries. So it's something that's very cool. Egyptian cities are really not overly well preserved. The Egyptians were all about the afterlife. So if something wasn't going to last forever, if something wasn't about the afterlife, then they didn't sort of build it to last, which is why we don't have a lot of evidence for cities. And the cities that do exist are not typical. So this is the city of Amarna, or Akhetaten, which is located in Middle Egypt. So it's in the middle of the desert. So sort of midway through the 18th dynasty, we have this, what's called the Amarna phenomenon, which is one of my specialties and one of my favorite periods of Egyptian history. So the son of Amenhotep III, who was Egypt's golden pharaoh. This is the peak point in Egyptian history. Egypt's absolute pinnacle was the reign of Amenhotep III. His son, Amenhotep IV, after his father died, changed his name to Akhenaten, which literally means servant of the Aten. So this Aten was a new god. So it's a sun god. He abolished all the other gods and made Egypt a monotheistic. Egyptian religion became monotheistic, which is the first monotheistic religion in history. So very important. And now, was he a revolutionary or was he an ogre? And history seems to, unfortunately, as much as I love the man, has not been kind to him and has sort of depicted him as, a dictator and an overlord, because there was no freedom of religion at this time. One of the reasons he marched everybody out into the desert and set up this capital was because it was unpolluted by other gods. So there was no settlement out here before Akhenaten. So he built this whole city in 20 years, which is absolutely amazing. So there's temples out there. There's a palace. There's a settlement. The settlement, I think, is especially interesting because, I like to think of it as sort of like the difference between Melbourne and Sydney. So you look at maps of Sydney and the streets are just chaos. And Melbourne's actually kind of New York. It's like in a grid view. You can tell it's a planned city, and that's the same as Amarna, or Akhetaten, as it was known then, which means horizon of the Aten. The city was abandoned soon after Akhenaten's death and was probably only inhabited for about 20 years. And it's a great time capsule into this period. It also has an extensive burial area. So in addition to the city, it has its own sort of Valley of the Kings, where there is only one royal tomb, because obviously there was only one pharaoh. It only lasted one pharaoh's reign. So you can visit Akhenaten's tomb. And there's a lot of other tombs there of officials. And the difference in the art is amazing. So in the tombs of the nobles, all you see are pictures of the king worshipping the art, and there's nothing really there about the person whose tomb it is. So he was it, basically. If they weren't even allowed to worship the art and the normal people. So Akhenaten got to, and his family got to worship the Arten, and everyone else got to worship the royal family. So you can kind of understand why he wasn't real popular. After Akhenaten's death, and we don't know what happened to his wife Nefertiti, who is one of history's most famous women, definitely one of Egypt's most famous women. We don't know what happened to her. But after Akhenaten's death, people sort of went around and tried to completely erase him from history. So they chiseled his name out, they destroyed his statues, they pulled this city down and abandoned it. So this is a very important period of Egyptian history, and one that the ancient Egyptians really didn't want us to know about. So they just didn't want to admit that this time period ever existed. And basically what happened was Egyptian religion, you'd live forever as long as people spoke your name. So every time you say Ramses the Great lives. So that's why they chisel people's names out, because you hate someone, you don't want them to live forever. Another lost city is Tanis. Tanis is a weird one. So Tanis is located in the extreme north of Egypt, so in the Nile Delta. It's was the capital in the 21st dynasty. So we're looking like right towards the end of the New Kingdom. It's a very confusing site. So we've actually got statues and buildings at Tanis which predate the founding of the city. How is that possible? And it was a great mystery until a few years ago when we discovered that these statues had actually been moved from their original location. So there was a nearby city, probably about 40 miles down the road, on another arm of the Nile Delta called Pir-Ramessa, which was the city that Ramses the Great established. So what happened to Pir-Ramessa is the branch of the river that it was built on silted up. So there was now no harbor and no inlet for the sea, and no water. So they moved the entire city 40 kilometers to another branch of the Nile, which is called the Tantric branch, which is how it got its name. So they moved all these giant colossal statues and temples 80 kilometers down the road. And everyone talks about, how did they make the pyramids? I think this is amazing that they actually did that. So that explains sort of why this city has buildings and statues from before its founding, which I just think is amazing. And again, this is a time capsule into this particular time period, because one day Tanis wasn't there and the next day it was. And then that branch of the Nile silted up and it was abandoned. So it wasn't then built on and built on and built on and built on. And we get this, a good example of this is like the archaeological site of Troy in Turkey. We have, the first iteration of Troy, which we call Troy 1, and then that was destroyed, and then they've rebuilt the city, and then there was Troy 2, and then they rebuilt it on top, and then it was Troy 3, and it goes all the way up until like Troy 13. And that's like the Roman Troy, but we don't get that at Tanis. We don't get that at Amarna either. So this is a complete time capsule because it existed for a certain period of time, and then it was abandoned. So you can see here, this is where it's located. So here's Tanis here. And Pir-Ramessa was probably, just here, and there was a branch of the Nile here, but this is, where it is today. Pir-Ramessa was actually here, the site of Avaris. So Avaris, before that, Avaris was inhabited before it was Pir-Ramessa. Avaris was actually the Hyksos capital, which is another period of Egyptian history that I really enjoy. And that comes before the New Kingdom. So just before Egypt's golden age, during the Second Intermediate period, it was invaded by these people called the Hyksos, who we think came from Canaan. We're not really sure. And they established the capital there. So like the Hyksos, who established the capital in the north to be close to their base of operations, in the New Kingdom, Egypt wasn't as isolated as it once was. So Egypt's isolation was always extreme. So if you look at where the capitals are in the Old Kingdom, so you've got Memphis here, well, that's probably not where we don't really know where Memphis is. More on that later. Memphis was around this area. And then you've got Luxor, which is all the way down south. So they were the capitals in the new, middle, and the early new kingdoms, where Egypt was relatively isolated. But then the new kingdom and the second intermediate period showed them that, hey, we need to get some defenses up here. And they actually started trading as well with people in the north. So that's why they ended up moving capitals to this sort of area. So they're closer to where modern day Lebanon, Israel, Syria, Iran, Iraq, they were trading with all those areas in ancient times, even as far up in sort of the later New Kingdom, Ramses the Great, all the way up into Turkey, which is really interesting. So they needed a capital that was a bit further north because these people in the north, they were both their greatest trading partners and their fiercest enemies. Okay, so Memphis. We don't go to Memphis, and I get asked, why don't we go to Memphis? So Memphis today doesn't exist. That's why we don't go to Memphis. It's really that simple. And then most people who've done this standard tour say, oh, we visited Memphis. And it's like, well, no, you actually didn't. Basically, they've set up a sort of collection of random archaeological bits and pieces at this site called Mitriana, and called it Memphis to encourage you to visit. There's a big statue of Ramses II. There's the Alabaster Sphinx and a few other bits and pieces. But it's not actually Memphis. It's in the vicinity where Memphis likely was, but it's not Memphis. So basically what happened to Memphis is so rivers change course over time. So over like the thousand or over 1,000 or so years, the arc of the River Nile changed. So if we look at this is northern Egypt. So this is likely where Memphis was. So it was here. Now, in ancient times, when Memphis was founded, this is what the Arc of the Nile looked like. So Memphis was close to the Nile. It was probably close to the banks of the Nile, but over thousands of years, this is what happened to the river. So you can see the Arc of the Nile covers the city. So now Memphis is buried under hundreds of meters of Nile mud, and will likely never be found or excavated. Even if they manage to find the location, the excavation costs and the effort involved would be immense. One of my colleagues at Macquarie University actually was excavating at the site of Buto, which is in the Nile Delta. So Nile Delta sites are also very, very difficult to excavate, because the branches of the delta in the Nile, they change like this as well. So Buto is buried under a lot of Nile mud, and they need things like irrigation equipment. They need hoses and pumps to pump the water out of the site, because the Nile Delta is kind of, a swampy sort of area. So, and the mosquitoes, and it's a horrible place to try and excavate. And Memphis would be even worse because it's the main arc of the river. It's not just a little branch. So, the amount of Nile mud that would be on top of this archaeological site would be insane. They'll never find it. Never. So this is why we don't visit Memphis, because it doesn't exist anymore and it's impossible. Okay, moving south, Abydos, another favorite of mine. So Abydos was the cult center of Osiris, so the god of the dead. So if you're familiar with the myth of Horus and Seth, which is the most common Egyptian myth that's, taught at schools, Seth killed his brother Osiris by tricking him into a magic box. He threw the box in the Nile and Osiris drowned. He took Osiris out of the box and chopped him up into many, many pieces and scattered the pieces all over Egypt. And Abydos is where his head landed. So Abydos became the cult center for Osiris. So Abydos is home to numerous interesting sites. Um, it's in the middle of the country, so a lot of tours they miss the whole middle of Egypt. So usually what happens is you do the sites around Cairo, you get on a train, and you end up in Luxor. You miss the whole middle, or you fly. The higher end tours will fly you down to Luxor. Um, Abydos is a really amazing site and a really significant site. This is where the very first pharaohs of Egypt were buried. So at the site of El Kab, which means the Valley of Pots. So it got that name because people would take offerings out there. People over 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 years have been leaving offerings there. First, because it was the site of the burial of the first kings of Egypt who were buried in pit tombs. Um, and then it was the cult center of Osiris, and then people just, well, it's tradition, we leave pots at this location with stuff in them. That's how traditions happen. And what happened over time is the sands covered these mountains and mountains and mountains of pots. And now when you walk over the sand dunes, you can actually hear the pots breaking, the mountains of pots breaking under your feet. So examples of pharaohs that were buried at El Kab include Narmer. Now Narmer, if you've been to Egypt and you've been in the Cairo Museum, you should be familiar with the Narmer palette, which shows Narmer smiting the enemies of Egypt. It also shows him uniting Egypt. So Egypt has always been Upper and Lower Egypt. And Narmer was the first pharaoh to unite Egypt as one country. So he's very significant. And it's also the home of the burial of the Scorpion King. I'm sure you're all familiar with that from the Brendan Fraser movie, which bears absolutely no resemblance to anything that ever happened in Egyptian history. Don't ever watch that movie with me. But the Scorpion King was a real person. All the people in those movies are actually real people. They're just all from different periods of history. And P.S., the Egyptian language doesn't match the subtitles, which always irritates me, but everyone else is ignorant, I guess, which is a bit funny. So some of the most important things that are here is the Seti the First temple. So it's built in an L shape, which is weird. Most Egyptian temples just go back and back and back, and the floor of the temple usually rises while the roof comes down. So it kind of goes into a very sort of low roofed sanctuary. But this one's in an L shape with a hypostyle hall, which is non-typical to start with. And it's actually built to commemorate Egypt's earlier pharaohs. Again, something that's kind of unheard of because the Egyptian kings spent their entire reign commemorating themselves. The work in the temple by Seti, which was unfortunately unfinished at the time of Seti's death, represents an unparalleled golden age in Egyptian art. It was finished by his son Ramses II. So Ramses II was prolific with his building, or was he? Every time we look at something and it's got Ramses II's name on it, we have to think, is this really yours, or did you just put your name on it? He was kind of famous for doing things like that. But you can tell it's really interesting to go into this temple because you can tell which parts were completed by Seti just by the workmanship. So the Seti work is what is carved in what we call bas relief. So that is the art of drawing the outline on the wall and carving the stone out from around the subject. Whereas Ramses' work is in sunken relief, so chiseling the figure into the rock. So bas relief is a lot more obviously labor intensive than sunken relief. So these are what the king lists look like. So these are cartouche. So these mark each king has one cartouche. Only the names of pharaohs are encircled in what you call the sacred ropes, which is cartouche. You can see the hieroglyphs representing the names. So this one here, for example, and they're all the Horus names, so that you won't see Ramses, which is like kind of like the popular name. So if you were to see Ramses, you would see Uzematra Seta Penra. So this one you see Menkara, which is Menkara, which is the builder of the smaller pyramid at Giza. So you can kind of read those there. And then you have Really cool. This is Seti, so you can see this the kingless were Seti's invention because hey, it's in bas relief, so you can see that the part around Seti's figure here is carved out. This is Seti here, and this is Ramses. This is Ramses the Great as a new prince. You can tell he's a prince because of this lock of hair. We call that the princely lock, and Ramses is actually copying down the king list. He's got his little palette and his little quill here. And that's something that Egyptian princes would have done. They would have gone to the temple. They would have practiced their writing by writing down old Egyptian stories, writing down these king lists, writing down the achievements of their father, to learn to read and write. And they always did that amongst the priesthood. This is a fantastic primary source. This is almost the equivalent of someone leaving the blueprints for the pyramids. This is fantastic. It's like, here's all the kings in the order that they reigned. There is a but. The further back it goes, the more we have to question it. And that is because it's not contemporary with those kings. So if you look at the Scorpion King, Narmer, even, Khufu and Khafre, the builders of, two of the pyramids at Giza, they're already several thousand years in the past by the time this was written down. So still kind of dealing with Chinese whispers. But the kings that were, sort of 500 years before this, I think pretty solid, except that it omits Akhenaten, of course, and Hatshepsut. So Hatshepsut is another pharaoh that was erased from history and is now one of Egypt's most famous pharaohs. I love the irony. So the Egyptians didn't like having this woman who took power. And interestingly, I don't know if we've all seen this new tomb that's been found in the Valley of the Kings of Tutmosis II. He was actually Hatshepsut's husband before he died and she took the throne. So that's a little bit of information on who he was. The Assyrian, this is amazing. This is also at Abydos. This is basically behind the Seti temple. So it's this weird construction that's sort of buried below, built below ground level for whatever reason. What is it? Your guess is as good as mine. And this is something that you won't get from an Egyptian guide. No Egyptian guide will ever say, I don't know. And it's okay to say, I don't know. We're dealing with ancient history here. We don't know everything. I don't know as opposed to we don't know, I guess. We don't know means we don't have this information yet. I don't know means I'm going to go and find this out, see if I can find it out. There's nothing written down to tell us what this is. It's not like, we have at Abydos, we have the king list with this extensive record of, how when the kings reigned, the period of time, the dates, and then we have this, and just like, what is this? So there's obviously theories. Seti wasn't buried at Abydos. Seti was buried in the Valley of the Kings with all the other pharaohs of the New Kingdom. So one theory is that it's a cenotaph for Seti's worship, but I feel that's odd because all the other pharaohs had their cult temples nearby at Luxor. And the other explanation is it's actually a cenotaph or a ceremonial tomb for the god Osiris. And I think that's probably what it is. That's the one I subscribe to. And that would also explain why it's been built below ground level. So this was actually built below ground level and then kind of buried, which is weird. Osiris is what we call a chthonic god. So he's the god of the dead. So he's the god of the underworld. So you want to build this cenotaph as close to his kingdom as possible. Now, the water in it. The water in it has recently been discovered. We did think it was a result of Egypt's rising water table, but it isn't. It's actually a water source that's been there for thousands of years, and we don't know where it comes from. So it's sort of a water source of unknown origin. Water is very important in Egyptian religion. So the Egyptian creation story goes that the Benben stone, or the first mound of earth, rose out of the waters of chaos with the creator god Atum atop the stone. And then from this Benben stone, that's where pyramid building came from. So the king was supposed to rise out of, the waters of the underworld and then ascend to the sky as, Atum or Ra or whatever at the time. So it's very significant that this was built over a spring, and it's about 10 meters deep at least, but they haven't actually figured that out yet. You can't go in it obviously, because it's flooded. I think the water table might have risen a little, but yeah, it's a really cool thing to go and see, and it's one of Egypt's great mysteries. Okay, so nearby we've got this temple. This is Dendra. So this is the temple to the goddess Hathor, who was the goddess of love. It's a very old temple, so the site's very old. So it's existed since the Middle Kingdom, but what remains is mostly Roman. It contains the first depictions of the zodiac, and there's a lot of color, which is really odd for a temple in Egypt. So when you look at temples in Egypt, you just see these sandstone facades and, there's no color, they're all plain. But in ancient times, they all would have been painted. They all would have been painted in vibrant colors. They just haven't lasted because of the sun, and the weather and the wind. So at Dendra, they have lasted. So you can see this picture here on the left is the roof of Dendra. So it's all carved in beautiful bas relief and painted in amazing blue, which would actually have been lapis lazuli crossed in, sort of crunched into the paint formula. You can actually see depictions of Cleopatra and her son Caesarion by Julius Caesar on the walls of the temple. The name Caesarion is, of course, where we get the medical term, Caesarean section. This temple has multiple floors that survive, and you can actually go up onto the roof and look around, which is pretty much unheard of in any other temple. And it has crypts underneath it, and you can go and explore those. And again, there's never anyone there. You might get, one or two people per day visit this place. It's probably about hour and a half north of Luxor, so it's not even that far out of most people's way, and it still goes unvisited for the most part. Within this temple, you get these two phenomenons. There's been a lot of noise recently about this one. So this is what they call the Dendra light. So they're trying to say that this is some kind of proof that ancient Egyptians had electricity. I don't know if they've looked real closely at this, but that's obviously a snake inside the bubble there. So this depicts Hatsutumus, which is a Romanized version of the god Horus. So Horus was actually Hathor's lover, and the temple is dedicated to Hathor. So it makes sense that there would be some depictions of Horus there. The oval container, which is this bit here, which is mistaken for a light bulb, is called the Hen, which is the womb of the goddess Nut, who's the sky goddess and one of Egypt's mother goddesses. If nothing else, this is a great example of placing modern ideas over ancient beliefs and concepts, which is something that while on tour, I really like to get into around the sort of bar at night at the end of the day, and we'll sit down and talk Egyptology. And the other phenomenon is the melted stairs. So they're not melted. Stone doesn't melt. I think we all know that. So basically, this is actually the corridor that leads up to the roof. So I've walked up here myself. They're worn down. The stairs are worn down, but also there's a bit of a creation. So basically, what happens is visitors over the thousands of years this temple has been in use walked up and down these stairs and tracked bits and pieces in, and they become embedded in the stone. It's the modern equivalent of getting mud in your carpet times a million, and you can't get it out. So the West Bank at Luxor. So yeah, Luxor is visited by everybody. Everyone goes there. The Valley of the Kings is there. Hatshepsut's temple's there. The Colossi of Memnon are there. Karnak and Luxor Temple are there. But these sites don't even scratch the surface of what's actually there and available for you to see on the West Bank. The West Bank is the burial ground of the New Kingdom and Egypt's golden age in the 18th dynasty. This is where everyone was buried. This is where everyone had their cult centers, and not just kings either. So nobles, even the workers who worked on the Valley of the worked in the Valley of the Kings, they were buried here. Most of the sites here are deserted, but absolutely no less epic than the ones that are on standard tour itineraries. So firstly, the tomb of Seti the First. Now, yes, this is in the Valley of the Kings. It is visited by everybody. However, when you visit the Valley of the Kings, you pay your entrance fee, and that entitles you to go into 3 tombs. This one's not included. This is only recently reopened. It is the largest tomb ever found, and it is spectacular. It was uncovered by Belzoni, so the same archaeologist who opened Khafre's pyramid in 1817, and it's been given the designation of KV17. So all tombs in the Valley of the Kings have this designation. So it's Kings Valley, and then number 17. So that's the 17th tomb that was found. It goes straight back into the rock, which is, again, interesting because this is how tombs of the Amarna period were built. So the tombs, you can date a tomb in the Valley of the Kings by its construction. So if you look at, say, Ramses the First, it's got a corridor and it's got rooms coming off here, there, and sort of everywhere, higgledy-pickledy like. Well, they go most commonly around in a sort of snail shell. But then the Amarna period happens, and then tombs that are post-Amarna period are built like this. And the reason that Amarna tombs were built like this is because they wanted the sun's rays to shine all the way back into the burial chamber and hit the pharaoh's sarcophagus. Now, the tombs are blocked up, but, as far as religion goes, that's just a minor detail. So this is one of the most beautifully decorated. It shows lots of different Egyptian gods we hadn't even heard of before we opened this tomb. It shows the opening of the mouth ceremony, which is probably the most important part of Egyptian ritual, funerary ritual. I'll talk more about that in a minute. Numbers, this is another site in Egypt where numbers are limited, so they only let a certain amount of people in here per day. I think it's 50 people. And the ticket is horrendous. The ticket to get in here is horrendously expensive. But with our tour, it's included as standard. So you get to visit this tomb, which is something that not many people on the planet will ever get to do. The tomb of Tutankhamun. I know what you're thinking. This is an undiscovered site. You bet it is. It's not included on the standard ticket either. And it's kind of out of the way of the other tombs. So most people don't bother to visit it, and most tour guides don't want to bother getting you tickets, or there's not enough time in the itinerary. For whatever reason, people don't visit it. They're more interested in his treasure than his actual tomb. It is one of the smallest tombs in the valley. And one thing that one common misconception is it wasn't undisturbed. So this room here, the annex, that was actually broken into and ransacked. But the burial chamber, which is where they have the famous picture of the seal, that was undisturbed, obviously. It was uncovered by Howard Carter in 1912. It's where we get the famous story about the curse of the mummy, because everybody who opened the tomb had a hand in opening the tomb, except Carter died. It's a very, very small tomb with limited space. This gives us an indication, and we know because we have Tutankhamun's mummy that he died before his time unexpectedly. So they were probably building another tomb for him, like a bigger, more elaborate tomb. It's unlikely that this tomb was actually meant for him in the first place. It's probably meant for his mother, Kia. And they did find some of her burial equipment and canopic jars in his tomb. So it was probably meant for the Queen Mother rather than the king himself, but they had to put him somewhere. There's obviously very limited wall space in this tomb too. So what we can take from that, we can take this tomb and contrast it with Seti's tomb, where, you can put everything, put the whole Book of the Dead on Seti's tomb walls because the tomb's just so massive. But because you only had limited space in Tutankhamun's tomb, the ancient Egyptians put the most important passages from the Book of the Dead, the most important scenes. And one of those was the opening of the mouth ceremony. So what you can see in this picture here is the king's sem priest. So he's the highest priest, and you can tell he's the sem priest because of the leopard skin. The sem priest always wore the leopard skin. And he has this tool called an adze. And basically what they would do is they put the adze to the king's mouth to give him the ability to breathe and to speak in the afterlife. So this was the most important funeral ritual in Egyptian funerary culture. And another thing, if we look again at this tomb and Seti's tomb, look at the treasure that came out of this tomb. Seti's tomb is 20 times the size of this one. Could you imagine what must have been in Seti's tomb? Boggles the mind. Workers' tombs. This is probably actually my second favorite. Second favorite. So up in the cliffs at Luxor, you have the workers' tombs. Now, these were the guys that actually built the tombs of the Valley of the Kings. You might think it's odd that people, at the lowest station in ancient Egypt actually got this kind of tomb. But it's not so strange. So basically what happened in the New Kingdom, we go back to the Old Kingdom, only the king really got an afterlife. And then in the later Old Kingdom, kind of filtered down and officials got mastabas. And then in the Middle Kingdom, the elites sort of started getting tombs. And then in the New Kingdom, it was like anyone who could afford it got a tomb. So the workers probably couldn't afford it, but they were workers. They were artisans, they were craftsmen, they were stonemasons. So basically what happened was, the tomb of Sennacherib, which is the one in the picture in the middle there, Sennacherib says to his mate who's a painter, hey, if you paint my tomb, I'm a stonemason, I'm going to dig out your tomb for you. So they'd swap skills. So they do it for free. And because they had proper painters and proper craftsmen, the tombs came out brilliantly. And they are the most colorful tombs in the Valley of the Kings. The artwork in these tombs blows the Valley of the Kings tombs out of the water. They are tiny. It's not for the claustrophobic. They are very small. They only have sort of one or two rooms, and the burial chamber is very small. And largely they do show scenes from daily life. They do show scenes from the afterlife. So for the common man, the afterlife wasn't that different to this life. So in the middle picture, you can see there, right in the middle register, Sennacherib and his wife working in the field. So this is what they called the field of reeds in the afterlife. This was the common man's version of heaven. So because the afterlife and this life were very similar, this gives us a unique window into the life of the everyday man in ancient Egypt, which we don't get very often. The Ramesseum. So this is the mortuary temple of Ramses II, and this is another reason why I don't believe the Osirian is Seti's mortuary temple, because the mortuary temple of his son is here in Luxor. This is one of the most epic mortuary temples that was ever built. It's right in the middle of Luxor and nobody at the West Bank, and no one visits it. You can tell by this photo. This is me here. There's no one else in the photo. Good luck getting that anywhere else. You'll never get that sort of picture at the pyramids or Karnak or anywhere like that. You'll never get to explore an epic temple by yourself. The temple's actually quite famous, which is, it's been famous. It's been, it was on the itineraries of ancient Greek and Roman tourists. It's had poems written about it. So it's actually quite surprising that so many people don't visit it. This is a great place to see the temple reliefs of the Battle of Kadesh, which is one of the which probably is the most famous battle in ancient Egyptian history. So you can see things like little details, like two spies from the other side sneak into the camp. You can see them beating them up, and you can see somebody feeding the king's pet lion. And one reason the Battle of Kadesh is so important is it triggered one of history's very first treaties, where we not only have the Egyptian side, but we actually have the Hittite side as well. And both treaties say each other won, so we don't really know who won, but that's another story. And temple also contains chapels for the king's wife, which isn't surprising, Nefertiti, as opposed to Nefertari, who was Akhenaten's wife. So Nefertiti was absolutely adored by Ramses the Great. So she had her own temple at Abu Simbel, so that's not overly surprising. There was also a chapel for his mother, which was really nice. And his mother and father were actually another royal burial that was found intact, and you can see their golden masks in the Cairo Museum as well. The reason it's sort of in disarray is these statues, the epic statues there actually fell down in an earthquake. So it's not a result of any destruction or somebody, hating Ramses and destroying his temples. But it is very, very impressive temple. Now, this one is my favorite. This is the temple of Ramses III. Um, Locals call it the Habu Temple. It's built in the shape of a military fort, which is super interesting. And the reason for this is Ramses III lived in a time of conflict, major conflict. So Ramses III was pharaoh at the time the Sea Peoples attacked Egypt repeatedly. So these were a group of marauders of so far unknown origin who attacked the entire Mediterranean during the Bronze Age period. And Egypt was the only civilization that actually survived their onslaught, and they only just survived. They were never the same again. So because this is built in a fort, the shape of a fort, it shows us that Ramses was anticipating having to keep fighting all the way through his afterlife. So it must have been bad. Um, it also gives us a unique insight into Egyptian military architecture, which does not really survive outside of this. Um, and it also shows the battles of the Sea Peoples, which is really important because we don't have a lot of information on them. So they're a group of different people. So there's roughly 12 different groups of people. So we can see the different characteristics of each sort of band of Sea Peoples. And this is actually one of my specialties. This was my specialties for my master's degree. So the Sea Peoples is a real passion of mine, hence why I love this temple so much. Okay, so winding up, these aren't the only hidden wonders in Egypt. So Egypt has a lot of oases to go and visit with a lot of other archaeological sites, including Siwa, which is out near the border with Libya, where the Temple of Alexander the Great is. That's an amazing site. We've got Serabit Kadim and in the Sinai area, the noble tombs at Aswan. The list just goes on and on and on and on. So just a little bit about our tour before I wrap things up. So all the sites I've talked about today are all included as standard, including, entrance to the Great Pyramid. We include the standard three tombs of the Valley of the Kings. You can pick different tombs. You can pick whatever tombs you like. Hatshepsut's mortuary temple. Other things that we haven't talked about, we visit an archaeological dig. And the important word there is authentic. So there's a lot of tours out there offering archaeological digs, but there's, especially from local operators, what they do is they go out and they set up a dig for tourists. Ours is, a proper dig funded by a university with an actual real archaeologist. We visit the nobles' tombs on the West Bank, and we have a guided tour of the brand new Grand Egyptian Museum, which is obviously highly anticipated and set to fully open in July. Fingers crossed, although they keep moving the date back, but I'm hoping this is it. It is partially open, so it doesn't matter what happens, we will be going, just whether it's a full tour or a tour of what's open. We'll see. Hopefully it'll be fully open. The tour is expert led by both myself and an Egyptologist guide. My specialties include the Sea Peoples, as I said, New Kingdom Egypt, so Egypt's Golden Age, Egyptian pyramids, pre-dynastic Egypt, as well as ancient Egyptian warfare and trade. Forgot the Amarna period. How could I forget the Amarna period? It's easy. Everyone tries to forget the Amarna period. Sorry, Egyptologist joke. Unique accommodation. So our motto here at Inverted Atlas is know where you are from the moment you wake up. All of our accommodation is locally owned and operated. We don't stay in any big chain hotels like the Hilton or the Mercure or anything like that, because all of that money goes to corporations. So, and you wake up in those hotels and you could be anywhere. And that's where we get our little slogan from. So we like you to know that you're in Egypt as soon as you wake up in the morning. Entrance to offbeat sites with limited visitor numbers and sites that are often off limits to other travelers, but included with us as standard. A little bonus, anyone who watches the lecture on YouTube or has attended today is entitled to $200 off the current price of the tour, and bookings must be deposited by the 30th of June. Thank you for coming. Really appreciate it. And if you have any questions, you can unmute yourself and ask away. All right. If there's no questions, I'll leave it there. Anyone who's watching on YouTube, if you have a question, feel free to leave it in the comments and I will try and come back and answer it. Thanks so much for attending today.